Welcome to Arts and Humanities are Central. I'm Margie Morgan, Dean of the College of Arts and Humanities, and your host for this exploration of the important role that the arts and humanities play in our everyday lives. My guests today are three graduates of the Department of Art, Becky Frehse, Garth Amundson, and Carol Hassen. Welcome to our show. Thanks for being here, and thanks for braving the past to get here. All three of these artists are part of CWU's second Art Alumni exhibition, which opens in April 2010. So we're glad that you're a part of that exhibition. And since that exhibition features artists who graduated between 1980 and 1995, why don't you start by telling us when you graduated from Central and what degree and what area of art? So you want to start?
Okay, sure. I graduated in 1984 with a Master of Fine Arts degree in painting. I always called it painting and drawing, but I think it's officially painting.
Painting. And so you got your graduate degree here?
Yes, I did.
Great. And Garth?
I did my undergraduate work here and finished in 1985. And it was mixed media painting, kind of a self-designed undergraduate program.
Undergraduate program. And then did you go on to get a graduate degree
I did
somewhere?
my graduate degree at Syracuse University.
Where you got an MFA?
Yeah, I went to my MFA.
Uh-huh. And Carol?
I did get an MFA in painting and drawing. It actually says painting and drawing.
Oh, does it? On you.
And in 1983.
So you were all here at the same time then?
Right,
Yeah,
we were.
Oh, wonderful.
Cross
So nice. Are you excited that Central's having these sizable art alumni exhibitions? Is this a special thing to you?
It is special.
It is.
I think it's a great opportunity.
It's great. And this reunion today,
Right.
meeting up with others that we haven't seen in a long time.
So do you keep in touch as alums?
Yeah. I haven't seen Garth as much, but Becky and I stay in touch a lot.
Yeah.
As well as actually I'm in touch with several because of having been involved with the gallery in Yakima. Several of the artists stayed in touch with. So I was always the network person.
Great.
And you're good at it, too.
Oh, thanks.
She's our manager.
Right.
You know, many people have an image of the sort of starving artist that ekes out a living in a garret. Do you make a living practicing art, or do you have another job?
I make part of my living making art, but teaching is the other part. And I've worked for the Washington State Arts Commission quite a bit since leaving graduate school as an artist in residence and also as a teacher trainer, training classroom teachers to teach art in their classrooms. So that's a big part of my income too.
Oh, that's great. And where do you teach? Where's your?
Well, when I go, they send me to schools all over. Well, it used to be Central Washington, and then in the last 20 years, western part of Washington. I live in Tacoma, and I also teach as an adjunct at the University of Puget Sound, and I teach art education at Pacific Lutheran University. So all those pieces get woven
and you have
into
time
my
to create art with all the teaching.
Yeah, because sometimes I don't teach at all. I take a semester off. Sometimes we travel, and then I have summer off. So. Yeah, I managed to stay productive all this time.
That's great. Wonderful.
Yeah, I teach at Western Washington University and taught there for 10 years. And my background involves visual presentation and display. I worked with both Nordstrom's and Ralph Lauren, and then ended up going back to school at Syracuse, as I said earlier, finished my MFA, and then found a job in the Midwest, and then came out here. And it's been a really great experience. So I think, I'm sure Carol and Becky can speak to this idea too, the balancing act between maintaining studio practice and then making a living is something that we all juggle. And you get, I mean, I've gone through periods of being really good at it and not so good at it. It just depends on what's going on. If you're getting ready for a show, you shift and divide your time according to what needs to get done, really. There's no magic formula that I know of, or I haven't figured it out yet.
Well, you're doing a good job balancing.
Well,
balancing act. Yeah. Carol?
Basically, I have taught at the university level, and I was a director at the Larson Gallery for 17 years, and then I went back to teaching part-time, and now I'm the director of Gallery 1. But it allows me time to still be able to be in the studio, and that's really important for me. And even when I was working 40 and 50 and 60 hours a week, I still almost always had a show every year, because I think for me, it's what keeps me sane. Doing the artwork is such an important part of me. And so But again, you do push harder when you have a deadline.
Right.
It's like everyone.
So you say that doing the artwork is such an important part of you. Did you know from little on that you wanted to be an artist, or is this something you discovered once you got to college? Or I mean, how did this happen?
Well, actually, for me, it didn't happen that. I moved around all the time, so I didn't even know about art really. And when I finally was able to go back to school after working, I worked as a paralegal for a while. I took a design class by accident, and it turned into changing my lifestyle. And I just fell in love with it, and I've been making art ever since.
Wow, interesting. Garth, what about you?
Yeah, I've always been surrounded by practicing artists, so I think I had a lot of role models, both on kind of local, regional, and then traveling, I think, for me, was a great exposure to contemporary art. I did a Rotary exchange as a high school student, and so for me, seeing international contemporary artists was really exhilarating. And so I think still, you find someone that you respond to as a mentor, as a superhero in the art world, and then try to figure out what they do and how they got there, and then just follow and seek out
Do you have a
people.
superhero?
I have lots of them. In terms of contemporary work, I look at a lot of Christian Boltanski is a mixed media photographer who I really follow quite a bit. Annette Messanger. There's, I go through periods of looking at more photo than painting, and then, I look at work constantly. It's also part of my job too to stay current, so
Right, sure.
that's
As
a big motivator. But in
Right,
terms
that's
of my own studio practice, there are people that influence me quite a bit.
Becky?
I think was thinking about that, and my grandmother was a farm woman in Illinois. I'm from Illinois originally, and she liked to paint in her she always liked to paint, but in her later years, she would get me to draw things on these little canvas panels for her because her hand wasn't very steady, and then she'd put the paint on. And one of my uncles was a really wonderful landscape painter too, and so I think somewhere that was definitely a seed that fed. I loved paint when I loved paint. Just love it.
Well, let's look at some of this work that you've created,
Okay.
and that is so fascinating here. Becky, let's start with your two mixed media pieces. Before we go to the specific pieces, could you define for us what a mixed media piece is, and why artists would choose that particular genre?
Well, mixed media is pretty much what it says. It's mixing different things together, kind of like collaged. And we usually think of paper or flat things, and mixed media includes a little bit more than that, and maybe paint. But for me, stuff. I
usually found a sort of found
usually
object?
found stuff. My studio probably rivals Francis Bacon's. If you've ever seen pictures of his, it's a real pit, and I'm kind of a pack rat. But I do have some organization, and I have a lot of stuff to work with, so that I feel like I'm painting with stuff, or I'm painting certainly with the fundamental elements of color and shape and line, and people give me stuff all the time. So I was given one of these old font type drawers like you see here on the table, or maybe you're seeing Painter at Sea, but I thought, well, this is great. Why do I have to have a flat canvas? In fact, the flat surface was getting a little boring to me.
So this is the first time you've done
Well, I started doing these about 2 years ago, and I had worked with other mixed media things before that, like old microscope slide file boxes and books, making handmade books, which is a pretty popular art form the last 15 years or so. Yeah.
So let's look at Portrait at Sea.
Okay.
What's the stuff there?
The Painter at Sea
The Painter at
has
Sea.
lots of dried up caked oil paint from old palettes. I mean, I save everything. So when I scrape a palette down, I put it over by my radiator and it dries, and then I can chip it off and embed it into another surface. And so you're always selecting and picking and choosing, and those drawers have these little compartments. So for me, each little compartment is a little composition, and then of course, the higher goal is to make the whole thing work. And
So you don't sketch this first. You just start putting stuff together.
I might have. I do keep a sketchbook, and I might have an idea about the sea. I started collecting things. I think this one actually started with the little pink, what's that little sea creature, a little sea creature I had, and then the blue. And I was thinking about how seasick I get whenever I'm on the sea, and I love the sea. And, you know, it kind of grows out of experience and stuff that you have. And then I decided, well, if it's about anything about being at sea and sort of sloshing around, then I'll slosh the paint too. So then, so for one of the final layers is lots of acrylic that's dripping.
So you're
and
sort of trying to
sloshing.
recreate your experience of the sea.
Yes,
here.
hopefully it gives you a little bit of that feeling. And, and then there's the plug at the bottom of the sea. So
And what about this other one here? Fascinating, riverbank.
this is Riverbank.
Riverbank?
Yeah,
And what,
Riverbank.
What materials do we have here, and what's
This has paper and some drawing watercolor, some poetry, Chinese poetry, which
it
I
looks
love.
very Asian.
Yeah. I studied Chinese painting in China a couple times when I've been able to live there. And so that aesthetic does come back into my work quite often. And
So there is a sketch there to begin with, and then it's superimposed.
this one I actually, if you can believe it, you know, I glued each one of these little pieces of
you did?
watercolor
Oh, my
paper in
gosh.
there individually. And then I did the composition after it was in there. So, but you know, there's nothing you really can't fix. It's not like you make a mistake, you know. Just change your mind and go over it.
Wow.
Something like that.
Are there general themes that underlie these two pieces, or your work generally, or your mixed media work?
The last couple of years, I've really been trying to work about our interaction with nature and sort of not how much nature moves us, but how much we impact. Or leave marks on nature. And you know, and it's sort of like you know, we don't get to wilderness very often. So usually, what we think about of nature is our backyard, or walking along a pond, or I have a little pond in my backyard, not a great one like Carol's, but rocks and water, which are a Chinese theme. So yeah, so that's what this work has been about, and it's really, really fun to do. And most people usually respond easily to things that have some reference to nature or the natural world.
And
anyway,
you have two similar mixed media pieces in the exhibition, is that?
I think I have three, and I also have another very new one. Now my next work is on old musical instruments, and so there's a violin in the show that I did, and now I'm working on a cello that was given to me by a violin maker in Tacoma. So the next show is called "Did You Hear That?"
Oh, good. Well, thank you. Garth, let's talk about your work. You do solo and collaborative photography, is that?
As I mentioned, I've been working collaboratively with my partner for the last 8 years, Pierre Gore, and we've been using images and combining them, and then also in another variation of mixed media, using appropriated photographs, and then I make images with a digital camera or analog camera, and then we combine them. And in this work that's on view at the Sarah Spurgeon Gallery, the subdivisions work was created while I was on a Fulbright in Mexico. And then during that time, because I really think that work is designed and built out of lived experience, much the same way Becky mentioned. So the idea that we make these formal objects with the technical use of cameras, et cetera, but then conceptually they're fueled by our experiences. We were separated at one point, and Pierre had to come to Mexico, and he lived with me. We had some immigration problems. He's Canadian, I'm American, and we were separated at the border. So the work reflects that experience. So the obra negra, which means literally black works, are these photographs of homes that are half built or three-quarters built or just being built. And the usual model is the primary head of household moves to the US and brings money back to build these homes. So I started looking at those kind of metaphorically in terms of our own relationship. Because
So we got to subdivision?
That, exactly. So the subdivision itself is the division, I mean, it speaks to our separation, but then also the home as this idealized place that is kind of unattainable in a way.
Where are those images from of the
the homes
the
themselves.
homes themselves.
The obra negras are throughout Michoacan. So I was living in a place called Pátzcuaro. I taught at a university, and as part of my Fulbright responsibilities, taught a photo course at UNLA, which is in Morelia, Michoacan. But then afterward, I moved out into the lake region in Pátzcuaro.
And what about the idealized, the photos juxtaposed?
Yeah,
with
so
this,
maybe I should clarify. So Pierre and I were just corresponding via email and then also through iChat, and we would just communicate and literally kind of sending digital sketches back and forth, and we didn't actually compose them until we got back. So I would send him images of these houses, these kind of unfinished homes, and I would go out and photograph those every day, send them to him, and he would send me back images that he was finding from old Life magazines, from old advertising, and then we started creating these juxtapositions between the two. And then when we got back, I was able to work with a technician, and we created the compositions, the digital compositions. And they're big 40-inch pigment prints. So one has a very literal kind of representational mimetic image of the house that I captured while I was in Mexico, and then the other side were the images that Pierre was scanning and kind of tweaking and digitizing while he was here in the States. So that's created that body of work.
Great. And let's look at the piece that you have on the table here. This is a piece you did on your own now, not a collaborative piece. This
so
is something titled Objective Distortion.
Objective Distortions.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, we both Pierre and I have been, we make our own bodies of work, and then we work collaboratively as well. We work independently, but then together. And this started in 1999. We did a residency, which I highly endorse any artist to pursue residencies, especially when you start working in an academic environment. You know how time is really fleeting, and we talked about budgeting our time. So a residency really gives you the gift of time. So we were lucky enough to get an Ohio State Arts Council grant when we were living in Ohio, and we went to a place called Chmielice outside of Prague in the Czech Republic. And while we were there, we lived in a beautiful castle, a Baroque castle, an abandoned castle, and we had to bring all of our water in. We couldn't drink. I felt like the typical American. I asked, can we drink the water? And the director said, you can, but I wouldn't. So we trudged up this hill. We brought these beautiful single form bottles of water, these plastic bottles of water called Dobra Voda. And I started collecting the bottles just because they were so beautiful. And I was making, I went with these ideas that I would, recontextualize the landscape, and I brought all these different format cameras. I brought a 2 1/4 and a 35 millimeter camera, and started making drawings at the same time. So one day I was just playing with these plastic bottles, and I slipped it over the lens of my 35 millimeter camera because I wanted to play with distortion. And it's certainly informed by art history. I'm very well aware of photo pictorialists and Julia Marek Cameron and some of the early photographers who are trying to emulate painting, almost like Impressionist painting, by softening the edges. So I knew technically what it would do to depth of field and to the focal length by sliding the plastic bottle over the lens, that I could create a distortion. But then this duality in mixed media for me is that I still love the handmade. So these stitches, these kind of blanket stitch that I use in the work, for me reminds me of drawing marks. And then the activity. I love the physical activity of making. And also, my schedule changed tremendously when I did take on a teaching position. So I was able to make these, they're pretty intuitive, but I was able to slice them up, make the pieces, and stitch them together kind of on the go. I've always really admired, primarily women who could do knitting in an opera. I remember being in an opera in Santa Fe and watching someone knitting booties, or this idea of kind of art on the go. So the better part of craft for me is this idea of portability. So suddenly I was able to make art like during torturous faculty meetings, and I could make.
That's a skill.
I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
That's something you could market to a lot of faculty.
No, but seriously, I think the compression of time makes you think. I don't think anyone really has, unless you're really well off, has those lofty, 12-hour days in the studio anymore. Waiting for divine intervention by the window. I don't think that happens. So, in any case, that's where this came from. So the cameras make images, and they work together.
Wow.
Great,
Hope I
thank
didn't go
you.
over.
So are some of the images in the show?
They aren't. These aren't, but they'll be. They've been shown. You can go to the website and see them as well.
Okay, great. Carol, let's move to your pieces. You also have some mixed media pieces here, right?
Right.
Fire Dance and Ghost Ship, I think.
This is Ghost Ship here.
And this is
That's
Fire Dance.
right.
Yeah. Can you tell us what inspired this piece?
I tend to work in a series oftentimes, and this particular series, we had just moved back to Ellensburg, and I was driving the canyon a lot and started looking at the canyon walls, and so I did a lot of different canyon wall pieces. But red has always been one of my favorite colors, and on this particular piece, it had a mind of its own. One of the things I like about creating artwork is that you're not always in control. And in this particular piece, all of a sudden, these what were dark cracks between the different layers of rock became a dancing figure, and it went with the redness of it. So I paint, this is on a cradle board, so it's painted on board. The red, the real red is painted on. And then I stain handmade papers and then paint and then glue them on top. And so I create all this layer of color that happens that way. And it creates a nice composition as well as really strong. And then when you stand back, you looks like this kind of madman, you know, dancing up this wall kind of thing.
Is the paper special in any way?
No, I just really like working with thin handmade papers, and I usually have to stain them myself. I can't find the colors that I want, so I lay out big layers. I have a lot of processes, and then after I get stacks of paper, I can then put them on in that kind of a way.
Fascinating. What's the story behind Ghost Ship there?
Well, this was a series last year, and on this one I'm working on canvas, not on a board, and began with, I was working with water, but I love the idea of being able to see, you know, kind of into things. And you know, I was real concerned with the color and the splash and the dash, and then all of a sudden, this kind of ghost ship arrived, and you know, it just kind of came sailing in, and it was once it was there, I had to keep it. So anyway, it was really a fun piece for me, and my work really evolves. I may think I'm doing one thing, but it changes as I'm working on it. And I used to try to control it and fight it. I don't do that anymore. I really let it work with it. The work I have in the exhibition is actually just strictly painting, just because that's the way the pieces that I ended up choosing. But I really like the combination of paper and paint. And you know, sometimes I embed other things in there, but I don't have the thick. It's still mixed media, because the term media means any form of artwork. So anytime you're combining plastic and yarn and something, it's mixed media.
This is all mixed media.
And so actually we all three do mixed media. But for me, I'm working more on paper and paint, and you know, it's a low relief as opposed to a high relief in terms of depth.
Great, thanks. Well, we don't have a lot of time left. I wonder, do you have any advice for students who want to create art and become practicing artists? What do you have? Anything you would like to tell them?
It's nice if you have support from family and other people, but I think you just really do have to do what you love. And I think art, or being an artist, is something that kind of finds you. Do you think that? I mean, you could try, you have to do it. And so if you can get a good education and get some art training, do it. And we have a wonderful opportunity to get a bachelor's degree or a master's degree in art in a place like Central, or other places where we've gone to school. And
you say you have to do it. I mean, you feel, in other words, internally driven and motivated to do art. It's just
do it and see how far it can take you. You know, and it's a lifelong thing too. It doesn't just stop when you leave school. I mean, it just starts when you leave school, really.
There is a real high attrition rate where people stop doing artwork. And, you know, one of the things that's actually really amazed me is the group of people that we were kind of involved with. We were lucky because many of us are all still doing artwork.
Right.
And I think part of that came about because we partied together, we ate together, we worked together, and we kept that friendship going. And so we encouraged each other to keep that going too. But I also think that once you really get a feel of doing artwork, all of a sudden you don't want to do other things, you know. So
Yeah, I have that sense about Central that we have a large percentage, an unusually large percentage of alums who still create art and who are practicing artists. They may have other jobs, but they still stick with
That's
their
right.
with their art, and I just think that's a wonderful thing.
Well, I think that Ellensburg also, I used to think that I was in the middle of nowhere, but in the center of the universe, because
Yeah.
we had access to a lot of really great things. And then what Carol said, this idea of creating a sense of community
Yeah.
and this exchange of dialogue. And I think that's so rare.
It's really rich here.
Yeah.
And I came to Ellensburg because I had graduate students. Well, I was at Arizona State University as an undergrad, and two of my teachers were grad assistants who'd come here from Central. And then I worked for an artist in New York who had done her undergraduate work here, Katie Bakke, and Al Amundson. And so everybody said, oh, you should go to Ellensburg. And it turned out great. I'd never been in the state of Washington before, but I loved my time here.
You
It was
know,
wonderful.
when I interviewed for my job as a dean, I had never been here either, and I'd never even heard of Ellensburg. And one of the things that attracted me was this sense of commitment to the arts that I felt not just at Central, but also in the town. And I remember seeing tourist literature describing Ellensburg as the town with a heart for art. And I said, you know, I want to live in a town like that with a sister town not far away, Yakima, that has a poetry pole. Well, I think we're just about out of time, so I want to say thank you so much for being with us today, and thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time on Arts and Humanities are Central.